ALS or sickle cell disease will be considered to be of less worth than someone else. Often, quality-adjusted life years are used by countries that have government-controlled healthcare systems to devalue treatment for those with chronic conditions and disabilities. This concept has been pushed by socialist healthcare advocates for years. Thankfully, the United States of America has not fallen totally prey to these harmful ideologies, at least not yet. I would like to remind my friends on the other side of the aisle that the first quality-adjusted life year ban within the Affordable Care Act passed with strong Democrat support. Therefore, this bill should be passed with strong Democrat support as well. It is not the government's place to determine whether a person living with a chronic condition or a disability is of less worth. This is why we need to prohibit the use of quality-adjusted life years in all federal programs and ensure that all human life has inherent value. Republicans will continue to work to reduce the government's hand in health care, and I urge colleagues to join us in supporting H.R. 485. Mr. Speaker, I stand in strong support of the rule and the underlying bills, urge my fellow members to support the rule, and I will reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume. This impeachment resolution was supposed to be our second rule of the day. We had an emergency meeting last week in the Rules Committee about fixing SALT. Everybody hurry up, it's an emergency. Better do it right away so we can vote quickly. And then, get this, then last night, a change was made to pull their emergency bill from the schedule. It was such an emergency that Republicans decided it's not an emergency at all. So not only did their bill not even fix the problem that they themselves created, it's not even going to come to the floor now because of their inability to govern. This majority is so incompetent, they couldn't even manufacture a fake vote to pretend New York Republicans are good at legislating. We wasted hours last Thursday at the Rules Committee debating a rule that's now been pulled from consideration. And for what? Will the gentleman from Texas tell us next time, will the gentleman from Texas tell us next that he's glad he had to sit through a hearing on a rule his leadership can't even bring up because they're so bad at governing? This Republican-led House is an unmitigated disaster. I would say it's a clown show, but that would be a disservice to actual working clowns. And that brings us to the second emergency rule. Mr. Speaker, impeachment is one of the most solemn, serious, somber things that we can do in this body. It's not something that ought to get thrown around lightly or invoked when you disagree with someone, or you don't like their policies, or you think they're doing a bad job. It's something that should happen after a grave constitutional offense has been committed, a crime against the Republic. The founders in Article 1 reserve it only for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And so today, I'm very confused because our Republican colleagues have presented zero evidence for impeachment. This could be the first time in American history an impeachment will go to the floor of the United States House of Representatives with no evidence, no proof, no elements of a crime, nothing at all. And you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to the lead Republican for immigration policy, our colleague Tom McClintock. And he says, and I quote, "The problem is the articles fail to identify an impeachable crime that Mayorkas has committed. In effect, they stretch and distort the Constitution in order to hold the administration accountable," end quote. Another Republican, Ken Buck, says, and I quote, "Secretary Mayorkas did not commit an impeachable offense and is not guilty of high crimes or misdemeanors," end quote. These are not my words. These are your fellow colleagues, Mr. Speaker, openly admitting that these vague, unprecedented articles of impeachment trivialize this process and make a total mockery of this institution. And what does this impeachment have to do with fixing our challenges at the border? Nothing at all. They say this is about securing the border. And their plan to secure the border is to impeach the guy responsible for securing the border and replace him with, now wait for this, wait for it, they aren't sure. The chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security couldn't tell us during our Rules Committee meeting who will replace Secretary Mayorkas if he were removed. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. For months and months and months, Republicans have said that they would shut down the government, they would default on our debt, refuse to do anything unless we passed a border bill. Well, good news. Senate Republicans worked out a border bill, and the person who negotiated it for Republicans, Senator Langford, was someone Donald Trump endorsed. Donald Trump said, and I quote, that Senator Langford is strong on the border, end quote. So I'm shocked by the Republican rejection of Senator Langford's bill. Before we even saw what was in it, before the ink was even dry on the discussion draft, Donald Trump came out and he ordered them to kill it. He ordered them to do nothing to fix our broken immigration system. They'd rather let chaos prevail than work with Democrats to have a conversation about a path forward. Because here's the truth. Here's the truth, Mr. Speaker. Republicans simply do not want to participate in government. They want to create chaos, they want to create confusion, and they want to create a campaign issue for Donald Trump going into the next election. They're not interested in solving problems. They only want to gain power. And that's the real dereliction of duty here. House Republicans' refusal to address our challenges at the border because Donald Trump told them he wants a crisis so he can help his campaign, so he can hide from his crimes. Well, they own this now. Republicans own this now. They own the border. They own the fentanyl crisis. They own it all because they refuse to behave like adults. They're acting like spoiled, rotten children who got what they want and still can't take yes for an answer. But they own all of this now. And if anyone needs more proof than that, look no further than the sponsor of this resolution, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a MAGA extremist who amplifies Holocaust deniers, who said 9/11 was a hoax, who says wildfires are started by Jewish space lasers. That's the legislative and intellectual force behind this impeachment resolution. In fact, if it passes, she's going to be an impeachment manager on the floor of the United States Senate. God help us. It's just more proof that this is fraudulent, unconstitutional garbage. But Donald Trump wants another fraudulent impeachment, another distraction from his own legal troubles, another excuse to kill a bipartisan border deal instead of working across the aisle to get something done. So here we are, because Trump calls the shots around here. He directed Speaker Johnson and extreme MAGA Republicans not to work with Democrats to address challenges at the border. And you know, one thing we know, Republicans work for Trump, not for you, the voters. They worship and they work for Donald Trump, who doesn't care about anybody but himself. They are frightened to death of the former president. Secretary Mayorkas, Mr. Speaker, is a good man, a decent man, someone who is trying to do his job, despite the fact that Republicans refuse to give him the tools needed to do what they're asking him to do. He's an honorable public servant who respects law enforcement and takes seriously his oath of office and his obligation to uphold and enforce the law. And in smearing his good name, Republicans are only impeaching themselves and showing what all their rhetoric about the border has been nothing more than a bunch of BS. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to recognize a fellow member of the Rules Committee, fellow Texan, Mr. Chip Roy, for 10 minutes.
For 10 minutes. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 10 minutes.
Well, I thank my friend from Texas, and I get no great joy of being on the floor of the House of Representatives and talking about something as important and solemn as the removal of a secretary of one of our departments, particularly one as important as the department that is in charge of Homeland Security. This is an individual who was appointed and then confirmed by the United States Senate. And this is one of the highest charges we have as members of the United States House of Representatives. The charge by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, particularly the ranking member on the Rules Committee, that this is a political exercise or that there are individuals taking, quote, orders from former President Trump, I think indicates the extent to which my colleagues on the other side of the aisle desperately want to make this political. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle desperately want to take the abject and total failure of Democrat leadership on the southern border, resulting in death and destruction of the American people, the undermining of economic activity, the death of our children, fentanyl pouring into schools, ranchers who are getting absolutely decimated, the empowerment of cartels, the empowerment of China. This has all happened at record levels, record numbers, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle know this. So they're desperately trying to deflect to legislation that was political and never had a chance to move from the Senate to the House, never had a chance to move, but they want to be able to deflect. They want to deflect an entire conversation about the failures of President Biden and the failures of Secretary Mayorkas to secure the border by not having a serious conversation about why we would be bringing articles of impeachment against a sitting secretary. The reason is simple. The Secretary of Homeland Security has blatantly ignored the laws of the United States he is charged to faithfully execute. He has done so with reckless abandon. He has done so in a way that has led directly to the death of American citizens, to the death of the very migrants that the Secretary suggests they want to try to help. 1,000 migrants along the southwest border last year dead. 53 migrants in a tractor trailer in San Antonio last year in the district where I represent. 75,000 Americans dead from fentanyl poisonings last year. These numbers are off the charts at levels we've never seen before, and they are the direct result of the policies enacted by the Biden administration, but very specifically by the Secretary of Homeland Security. It is his leadership of that department that has led to an abject failure of the department to secure the border. It is not the line men and women of the Border Patrol or ICE who are out there trying to do their job, but they're being denied the ability to do their job because the Secretary won't let them. The Secretary has turned them into processing machines. He's done so intentionally to flood the zone, and they basically acknowledged that. He's turned the law upside down, that the basic law of requiring that they have operational control of the border, that we stop the flow, that you have papers coming to the United States, has been turned upside down. And in its place, the administration, and specifically Secretary Mayorkas, has used exceptions to swallow the rule. Exceptions for asylum, exceptions under parole that are supposed to be on a case-by-case basis, based on our benevolence as human beings to try to help people, bipartisan desire to do so, has been made to swallow the rule of actual border security. And as a result, the numbers have been astounding. And a key consideration, of course, are the types of individuals that are coming into the United States. We're not talking about some workers who want to go from Nuevo Laredo to Laredo or Juarez to El Paso. We're talking about dangerous individuals from all over the globe, including 331 that have been encountered that are associated with terrorist organizations under this administration, under Mayorkas' watch, which compares to 11 under President Trump. Now you say, well, aren't they doing their job? They encountered them. No. Those numbers indicate who we're finding, not the 50,000 a month or so gotaways that are pouring into the United States. Now we see cops being beaten in the streets of New York by people who are here illegally, walking out of the court with no bail and flicking off the American people. We have a woman being dragged out of a parking garage in New York, by migrant gangs dragged through the streets of New York. We have all sorts of danger to the American people. People like a cheerleader getting killed in Texas by somebody here illegally. An illegal who posed as an unaccompanied child who lived with a family in Florida and then killed the family. That's what we have happening in the United States of America, and it is directly a consequence of a Secretary of Homeland Security who is failing to secure the homeland, as he is charged to do when he takes an oath to fulfill his duty to carry out the laws of the United States. If the Attorney General just went out and ordered all the United States attorneys and prosecutors and assistant U.S. attorneys to stop enforcing the law, allow reckless abandon, he should be impeached. That is, in fact, a high crime and misdemeanor. And this is where I disagree with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and a few, I think, on my side of the aisle. This notion of high crimes and misdemeanors and what it includes or does not include, but it most certainly includes officials in the administration, the executive branch, who are completely refusing to carry out their duty. It's literally his job is to secure the homeland. And he's refusing to do it. The fact of the matter is, some of my colleagues that have concerns about issues of maladministration and so forth, if you believe this is maladministration, I do not. I think it goes beyond maladministration. It is the purposeful, willing, ignoring of the law to endanger the American people that goes beyond maladministration. But even if you accept the notion that it is maladministration, I keep hearing people say, well, the founders rejected maladministration. Well, the fact of the matter is, Colonel Mason put it forward, Mr. Gary put it forward, he seconded it. Mr. Madison raised a concern. He said a term would be equivalent to a tenure during pleasure of the Senate. There was some debate. Governor Morris, Colonel Mason withdrew maladministration. There was no vote. There was no affirmative rejection of it. There was a debate. They withdrew. And instead, in its place, he substituted, the language was not there at the time, other high crimes and misdemeanors. Okay, now you go back and say, well, what does that mean? Well, I wasn't there. You go back and look. There are debates about what it meant. But one thing is, British common law had developed a definition of high crimes and misdemeanors that included, but was not limited to maladministration. Now, this is a debate worthy of academic debate. But the fact is, it is up to us. There are no elements of the crime in the Constitution. There is no specific requirement that there be a violation of statute. There's no mens rea in the Constitution. It is for us and us alone to determine. And when the Secretary violates his duty to the Constitution, violates his oath to defend the people of the United States and secure the homeland, then it is incumbent upon this body to call out and reject that secretary. And in this case, that secretary being Secretary Mayorkas. There are other tools at our disposal, but there are not many. We have the power of the purse. We should use it. That is a speech for another time. But one last point on this notion that somehow by rejecting the bill that the Senate was debating, and it, by the way, has not sent to us, the Senate is merely debating it. They're not even debating it yet. They haven't even proceeded to it yet. They haven't even gotten past cloture on proceeding to it yet. Why? Because it is fundamentally flawed. The bill does not do what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle were suggesting it does. So I'm sorry, you're getting punched in the head 10 times. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to say, well, sorry, we'll just start punching you in the head 5 times. Why won't you take that half a loaf? I'm sorry, that's not how that works. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to actually stop the flow. And that bill was flawed. It would have set essentially in permanent stone, effectively, mass migration. It has 250,000 visas, 250,000 work permits. It ensconces alternatives to detention as part of how the releases would work for asylum claims. It would spend $4 billion to hire up new asylum officers by this administration, by this secretary, who has the power right now to stop this flow but refuses to use it. The President of the United States could use 212F right now and stop the flow. The Secretary could apply the laws the way they're supposed to be applied with respect to asylum and parole, and he could stop it right now but refuses to do so. We're here to defend the people of the United States who don't have a voice. We're here to stand up for the forgotten men and women of this country who are tired of getting rolled over. That's why we're here, and the Secretary of Homeland Security deserves to be held to account. I rise in support. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.